Let's get joined up. This week's show is sponsored by Bandcamp.com, an online record store and music community where passionate fans discover, connect with, and directly support the artists they love. There's thousands of bands and artists on there, including my band, the Wry Dogs, whose second album, Pigs Might Fly, is out right now. Here's a quick snippet of the title track, which is also available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Music.
Because your eyes may be weeping, but your conscience is sleeping. So baby, don't you cry. Your faces are drying and you say...
It's totally free to join Bandcamp, and as the Wry Dogs are brand new members, we're now looking to grow our fan base, so your support would be greatly appreciated. Just search the Wry Dogs, that's W-R-Y Dogs, and hit the follow button. Right, now we can cue the theme tune.
Joined up writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 159 with Melissa Sercia, author of multiple urban fantasy and paranormal romance novels, and she's here to talk about her latest, After I Run, as well as chatting about her experiences as a hybrid author with a foot in both the traditional and indie publishing worlds. We also chat about why some people, spoiler alert, it's me, struggle when writing sex scenes and how it felt when she landed that 3-book deal with her debut novel. So it's a really fun conversation. Before we get to that, a little check-in from me. As you may or may not be able to hear from my voice, I've got a cold. And yes, so far anyway, it does seem to be just a cold as I've been testing negative for the past week. But I've had to self-isolate as my wife unfortunately did get COVID. We're both double vaccinated and fortunately my wife is finally starting to feel a bit better, but it's not been the most fun of weeks. I've felt too tired to write most days, although I have been tinkering. I do hate that word though, because even as I say it, it just sounds like a form of procrastination. With a new idea that I had for a prologue for my novel Safe Hands. I can't work out whether it's the fact I've been a bit under the weather or if it's because I don't really believe in the idea, but it's been a struggle just to write the 1100 words or so that I've managed so far. I think sometimes we underestimate the effect our physical well-being can have on our mental well-being and our ability to be creative. And I've basically just got a heavy cold, whereas I've spoken to authors like Rebecca Bradley and more recently Erica Waller, both of whom have been struggling for years with serious chronic illness, and yet they continue to write. So, to be honest, I'm in awe of them, and when I'm not feeling 100%, I sometimes remind myself that there are people that work multiple jobs, have small children, or they've got other family traumas to deal with, and yet they still manage to get the work out. Having said that, I don't think it's healthy to compare yourself to other writers either. In fact, CJ Tudor, best-selling author of The Chalkman and previous guest, put out a Twitter thread only a couple of days ago on this very topic. On the face of it, Caroline's an incredibly successful writer with multiple books under her belt, and she's been feted by people like Stephen King, and yet she's been faced with so many personal difficulties over the past 18 months that she's had to shelve the project that she was working on and push back the release of her next novel. It was really brave and honest of her to explain herself. She doesn't need to do that. And she made the point that usually, especially on social media, all we really want to put out is our good news or project or project an image of easy success. And the responses to Caroline's tweet show you that isn't the case at all. We all face challenges, big and small, and sometimes it's better to be kind to yourself and remember your health and well-being and those of the people that you love, and that should come before anything else. That said, I do need to get a grip and write some bloody words. I mean, I have only got a cold. And something I realised in my conversation with today's guest, Melissa Sercia, was that one of the things that could be slowing me down with my new draft is that I don't totally know where I'm going with it. And I've always thought of myself as a plantser, in that I lean towards writing by the seat of my pants, but I like to at least have some idea of where I'm heading. And the problem I currently have is I think I'm still trying to hold on to some of the plot elements of the previous version of the book when I know, deep down, what I should be doing is more character work and letting the new versions of these characters tell the story. One way I could do that is just to throw caution to the wind and just keep writing the book as if I'm doing NaNoWriMo or something and plough ahead. But in my experience, anyway, that's just going to lead to massive problems down the line when I'm trying to wrangle it back into a manageable story. Something that I've dallied with is just trying to write an extended synopsis. This happens, then that happens, then this happens, etc. But I always end up abandoning that because I'm impatient to get back to the actual writing. And one thing that Melissa mentioned was Steph Green's idea of a skeleton draft, which sounds like it could work for me. I won't say any more about it because we chat about it during the conversation, but I think that should be my next step. Just hammer the story out, tie up all the plot points and story beats and make sure it's as good as it can be, and then write the damn thing. But what do you think? How do you approach these types of problems? What works for you? As ever, I'd love to hear from you all, so do drop me a line, and the best way to get in touch is via email, wayne@waynekellywrites.com, but you can also tweet me at JUPodcast or drop me a line on the FB page. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's totally free, and you get a couple of downloadable goodies when you sign up, and you'll be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, let's get to today's interview with Melissa Sercia. So Melissa is an award-winning urban fantasy and paranormal romance author with a passion for philosophy, mythology, and all things supernatural. She's the author of the Blood and Darkness and the Immortal Billionaires series, including her latest book, After I Run, which is out right now. So enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end for a sign-off.
Joined up writing.
Okay, Melissa, thanks a lot for joining me on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you just start off just by giving us a sense of where you're speaking from and tell us how things are going for you at the minute.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm in Northern California in the U.S., and things are going really well, actually, despite, the past couple of years. We're just chugging along over here, and I'm doing a lot of writing and having a nice morning so far. Got my cup of tea, so yeah.
Perfect. So why don't you start off by telling us about, I think it's your latest book, which is After I Run, is that right? Which I think is part of your Immortal Billionaires series. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Immortal Billionaires is my first steamy paranormal romance series, and each book is typically, it's like a standalone. I mean, there is an underlying arc that goes through the whole series, but each book features a different couple. So After I Run is the third book in the series, and it follows Cassius, who is a werewolf, a billionaire werewolf, and Harley, who is a computer hacker, and she has been hacking into his accounts and his business associates' accounts for reasons unknown to him during the time in the beginning, and so he doesn't know she's a woman at first. So he kidnaps her,
As you
do. Yeah, and is very surprised to find out she's a woman, and he's a gentleman through and through. So he doesn't believe in holding women hostage. So I wanted to make sure to create a character that was not okay with that kind of behavior. So it was kind of a surprise for him, and he's like, great, now I've got to figure out what to do. So, but this is not a spoiler. He lets her go in the very beginning, and then some other circumstances happen to where she actually needs his help and has to rely on him. So the story is their journey together and trying to figure out, the person she works for, who, basically hired her to hack into his accounts, and then their growing attraction for each other. And so it's a bit of an enemies to lovers in the beginning, and really, it's just all about their journey. And then there's also this underlying plot arc that carries through from book one.
Great. So there's lots of intrigue and stuff going on, basically, lots of twists and turns.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so do you remember where the first seed for this series started? Do you remember kind of what kicked it off for you?
Yeah, I had just finished writing a book for my publisher, City Owl Press, which is an urban fantasy series I have. And I just finished editing that book, sent it off to them. And so I had some time on my hands. And of course, we were in lockdown and quarantine. And I started thinking, okay, what am I going to write next? I wanted to do something a little different. And it was a combination of things. I was watching a lot of TV, as we all were, I'm sure. And I was rewatching episodes of The Vampire Diaries, which is one of my favorite shows,
Yeah.
and watching some new things on Netflix. There was a movie called 365 Days, which was a really steamy kind of movie. I think this is when Netflix really started going in that direction with some of their
Know your audience.
content. Yeah, exactly. And I thought, well, it's an interesting concept, this billionaire that, kidnaps this woman. But it had its issues, of course. I thought, well, this would be a cool world, but making it more supernatural and putting on my paranormal romance elements that I love so much. So I just started kind of thinking, okay, what am I going to do? I start brainstorming, and I usually, when I'm plotting, I do it by hand, just pen and paper. And I also have a very a deep love for cooking. I'm half Sicilian, so I wanted to incorporate food and the hospitality industry a little bit into the story as well. I grew up in the hospitality industry. I've done pretty much every job in a restaurant you can imagine. I wanted my main character to be an aspiring chef. So she moves to New York City. The first book's called After I Fall. So she's from a small town, moves to New York City in hopes to becoming a chef, gets a serving job at a restaurant, and the restaurant is owned by this Italian vampire. And so they have this very heated, tumultuous relationship. So I wanted to incorporate all those different things in my life that I'm passionate about, and then make this really intense, suspenseful vampire story.
And bring that paranormal romance to it. So with the paranormal romance, for the uninitiated, what is paranormal romance? How do you describe it, and kind of what do you think attracts you to it so much? What attracted you in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Paranormal romance is essentially, it's a romance novel, but with the elements involved are paranormal. So that can be supernatural creatures, anywhere from vampires, werewolves, witches, fairies, dragons. And then, of course, there's a lot of subgenres now that have branched out of it. I mean, you can do paranormal romance set in Regency, like a Bridgerton, but with vampires, if you will. So it's a fun genre. I've always been drawn to it. I actually started out reading more of like the darker themed books when I was younger, a lot of Anne Rice and Stephen King. But as I became, older and started looking at things like The Vampire Diaries and Teen Wolf, and, they're fun.
So a bit more of a light touch to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do write darker stories. I'm not, I don't shy away from the gore, and my love scenes are explicit. So I definitely like the darker stuff, the more raw, like grittier type of storytelling. So yeah, that's why I kind of wanted to write it. And with urban fantasy, which is the genre I started with, the main difference between the two is urban fantasy, the romance usually takes a back seat. It's there, but it's not the main focus of the plot.
Yeah.
There's usually a quest involved, and it's urban fantasy set in a modern setting, but with magical elements. So I enjoy writing both. I just kind of switch my focus from time to time as far as like what I'm in the mood to write, or what my schedule's like as far as commitments to the publisher, or my After I Fall Immortal Billionaires series. That's something I actually do on my own. I self-publish that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about that. So obviously you sound like you've got a foot in both camps with traditional and indie publishing, so you can kind of see both sides of that. What attracted you to giving? Was this series the first time you tried indie publishing, or what was the first thing you indie published, and how did you kind of get yourself into that? Because it's probably it was a steep learning curve, I'm guessing, when you first started doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this was my first foray into indie publishing. I got published with City L Press in 2018, like literally knowing nothing about the industry. And it was like such a huge challenge and, a crazy learning curve. But I really I wouldn't have been able to indie publish if I hadn't had that experience, I think, and some people are different. Some people just jump straight away into it. But for me personally, I'm very meticulous and organized, and I like to have all the information before I make any decisions. So the traditional publishing really taught me about editing and, collaborating with people and just understanding like what a brand is, and all those things that you do need, on the business side of it. It's not just all, creative writing all the time. So when I decided to go indie, it was more because I wanted to expand my reach. I wanted to have more control over my content, choosing my own cover and picking my own editors. And not because I was unhappy in any way with City Owl. I'm still with them and I'm still writing books with them. But it was just something I really wanted to challenge myself with too, and just see if I could do it. And for about a year prior, I had just decided to research everything I could on it. Joined 20 Books to 50K on Facebook, which is the best indie group on Facebook there is, and just kind of lurked and searched all the posts and read a bunch of craft, how-to books and things like that. And so, yeah, in October is when I published the first indie book, and I was really pleasantly surprised at I'm thinking, who's going to buy this book? They're used to, first of all, my urban fantasy books. This is such a big turn for me. I mean, even though it's still supernatural, it's quite different. So I was really happily surprised with the response from people, and I've actually found like a whole new audience.
That's great. And do you find, I mean, as you say, you're happy with your traditional publisher, and that's great, and you're doing your urban fantasy and everything. But I have spoken to other authors before, and excuse me, and they've often said, everything it's great, but then if for whatever reason they want to write in a totally different, I mean, yours is not totally different, but as you say, there are big differences when they want to change genre, or they want to go, okay, I normally write thrillers, but now I want to do sci-fi or whatever it is, the publisher is sort of like, well, we're kind of carving out this niche for you, and this is kind of what we're marketing you as, and it can be tricky, and to kind of turn a big bus around or whatever, I guess, is how they would kind of see it. So I suppose you can be a little bit more nimble, can you, if you're self-publishing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think City Owl Press is really great in the sense of they give us a lot of freedom. I mean, as compared to other traditional publishers, and just from what I've learned from talking to other author friends of mine, City Owl is very flexible and gives a lot of freedom. The only genres that you can't, write in are the ones they just don't represent. So, they don't do like young adult, and they don't do sci-fi currently. So there is a lot of wiggle room there, which is great. But yeah, when you go out on your own, it's just, it's very empowering. You learn so much more about the business, how to do advertising and marketing, and how to, just really build your brand. And then you have control of that content. Like I said, the covers and, writing the blurbs and not having to get the blurb approved. You're the last person to approve it. But with that does come a lot of headaches as well, because if you write the wrong blurb, then you're responsible for being like, okay, what did I do wrong? I have to change this, myself. And you don't really have anyone, to bounce off of. Ultimately, it's, completely in your hands. And then you're also footing the financial costs too of, publishing a novel, which can get expensive over time when you're doing multiple books, like I am. So, it can be challenging. I feel like there's pros and cons to both, because you have that support system with a publisher. You don't have to do anything really except write the book, and then, of course, use some launch strategies and marketing after. But the process itself is pretty seamless. So, but you're giving up control. You know what I mean? So it kind of goes back and forth.
Do you think you have to be a certain type of person or have a certain qualities to indie publish? Because as you say, I know a lot of writers, and the thing that would kind of put them off with indie publishing more than anything is the fact, all that stuff that you're talking about, all that business side of things. They're just like, I just want to go and write the next book, please. Can I just leave that to you? So I'm guessing that's the case, is it?
Yeah, you definitely have to be organized and ambitious and self-reliant. You have to be aggressive as far as like learning things for yourself. Like no one's gonna, walk you through it and hold your hand. I mean, there's so many people out there that are super supportive in the community, in the indie community, but at the same time, you have to take that initiative and treat it like a business, because that's really what it is, at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, it's not for everyone. I used to think it wasn't for me. I was sort of like, oh no, I'll never do that. I'm sure I probably said on a podcast 3 years ago, oh, I'm never going to do indie, but we change and we grow. And now that I have done it, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I don't really want to ever stop doing indie, regardless if I continue with traditional as well. I enjoy being a hybrid author. So yeah, but it is really challenging. And I think that certain people, and it's okay if they don't want to do it. If you just want to write your books and have a traditional publisher support you, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's how they've been doing it since the beginning.
Sure, yeah. So where do you find all the time to do this? Obviously, you're quite prolific. You've released quite a lot of books yourself, as you say, and you're traditionally published. So where do you find the time to do all this stuff?
Well, it's all I do now. I write full time. I do co-host a podcast as well. So, but that's like once or twice a week, depending on my writing schedule. I wake up in the morning and I spend usually 1 to 2 hours waking up and doing marketing and social media and engaging with all of that stuff. And then about the afternoon is sort of like my creative peak. So I'll sit down and write, or if I'm in editing mode, I'll do my edits. And then I take breaks, like every 30 minutes. It's really important to kind of get up and walk around and stretch your legs. And then, I'll usually make dinner. And depending on like if I have a deadline that I'm really trying to meet, I may write again later in the evening. If not, I will just be done in the afternoon. I usually try to aim for 6,000 words a day if I can.
Wow.
3,000 is like my minimum. I get upset with myself if I do less
That's a
than
lot.
3,000.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So, that can take me anywhere from 2 to 6 hours. And like when I'm in crunch mode, like if I've kind of lagged a little bit and maybe took a few too many days off, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, great, I have, 2 weeks to finish this amount of words, then I really start, doubling up, and I've done as many as 10,000 in a day before. So yeah,
Jeez.
I try to make it work. I do try to take days off now, which I didn't before. I was overworking and burning myself out. So now I definitely take a day or two off a week to just, be like everyone else and sit on the couch and watch TV, or, go outside for a walk, or, just do normal.
Refill the creative
things.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you kind of described this series in particular as one of your steamy paranormal romance series. Now, full disclosure, I'm absolutely terrible at writing those kind of scenes, and I always end up. I mean, there's only me here writing it, and yet I'm embarrassed and I'm cringing the whole time. So was that something that you were? And having spoken to some other writers have that same issue. So was that something that you were always comfortable writing, or did you have to work at it? How do you approach that stuff, or has it never been an issue really?
Yeah, no, it definitely is something I have had to work at, because when I wrote my urban fantasy series, Blood and Darkness, there was some love interest, there was a love triangle, and there were a couple, steamy scenes, or which I thought were steamy at the time. Mm-hmm. And I did actually get some feedback after, and Blood and Magic was the first novel I ever wrote. And I did get, a few reviews that were like, oh, the sex scenes weren't believable, or this and that. And I thought, oh God, I'm just like really crummy at writing these. They are a little cringy at first. You kind of like, you're sitting there and you're looking around, you're like, is somebody going to look over my shoulder and see what I'm writing?
I think that's the thing. Yeah. I think there's partly that, and there's obviously, I mean, you don't think it when you're writing anything else. If you're writing, I think because obviously if you're writing, I don't know, a scene where someone comes down to the kitchen and does some washing or whatever it is, like that's something that everybody's done. You can sort of go apply your experience to it. As soon as you start applying it to like sex scenes or whatever, you immediately think, people are just going to be thinking that I wrote this all the time. This
right.
It's really hard to get out of your head, I find.
Yeah. No, it is. Yeah. And I think you know what it is? I started reading a lot of that type of genre last year, early last year. I started reading a lot of romance, steamy romance, and kind of understanding like how it's crafted and structured. And I think that's like the most important thing when you want to like be good at something as a writer. You need to like really read a lot in that genre or in that style,
advice,
because that's honestly like the only way I think, to kind of understand how other people do it, so you can like do it yourself in your own way. So I did read a lot, and I think the more I started reading, the more I got comfortable with it, and it seemed, less daunting, less cringy. And so when I wrote, the first book after I Fall, I had to really like just, break like my inhibitions, and just remind myself that, I'm writing about these characters. This isn't, a memoir.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I say, you write about whatever genre you write in. You might write something, you get characters to do things that you would never ever do or would never ever say. And I don't have any problem with that at all. It's fun. But
exactly.
often with those kind of scenes, I don't know, there's just something about it. I mean, it's childish. It's childish
it's just,
in one
whatever
way.
you're comfortable with, and I think, like I said, it took me a little while to get comfortable with it. And now I don't even think about it. I mean, it's hilarious. It's just like a day of work. I'm sitting here writing a sex scene, and it's, I'm drinking my tea and, just.
And I think probably the other thing with it is as well, if it's a stranger reading it, I am I'm fine with that. I think it's the idea of my mum reading it or my best friend or what.
I actually told my dad, I was like, "Do not read this series, please." And to be fair, he's not really that big of a reader, anyways. Like he loves television shows.
You didn't
but
want
he's
him
not
to stumble onto it or anything.
Yeah, I was like, oh, there's no need for you to read this, But my sister, she loves those books. She reads them, and she'll, send me texts like while she's reading, like, "Oh, this scene's hot," But it is weird when you think of like people that know you reading it. Strangers, that doesn't bother me at all. But I always tell my parents, like, "Oh, maybe don't read this one."
Because there's those award. I never remember what they're called, but isn't there an award that kind of happens every year, like the award for the worst sex scene in a book or whatever? And
is there? Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't know what it's called, and you'll often get like they'll put little excerpts up on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and you read them, and you like. My worry would be, oh my god, that's what I think I would write if I. I mean, I've got like I've had one scene that it's not even a full explicit sex scene or anything, but for me it was like, oh whoa, I'm getting a bit and even that I'm thinking, oh, I don't I'd hate the idea of that turning up somewhere like that. Oh, look how he's described this or whatever. So I think the gist of it is, like you say, read lots of that stuff anyway, get more comfortable with it, and just grow up and just crack on with it.
And realize that there's like a huge audience for it. I mean, the romance industry is a $1 billion industry. It's the most best-selling of all the genres, really. And there's just so many, women and men, mostly women, that literally devour, romance novels of every subgenre, whether it's, paranormal or contemporary. Yeah, it's just a huge industry. So just know, like, if that's something you want to write, but you're nervous about it, once you get in, that was another thing that gave me confidence, is when you start getting that feedback from the readers, and they're just like, they want more smut from you. You know what I mean? They're like, this is not even enough. You're like, oh, wow, these people are insatiable. So that's like, it gives you confidence that you're like, okay, I'm not being cringy. I'm like literally catering to like what they want to read.
And so when you're writing one of these books or whatever, do you have like a certain number of scenes in your mind? Is it like, well, I've got to hit at least 5 of those type of scenes for each book, or is it is pretty organic?
It's pretty organic. I do an extensive outline beforehand. I tried to do the pantsing method once, and it was just it was a hot mess. It just doesn't work for me. So, because it just makes your editing and revision process a nightmare when you've realized you've just written yourself into multiple corners.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely do an extensive outline. I usually know like what the word count I want, like the length of the novel. So these particular books, they're a little shorter than what I normally write. They're 55,000 words. Typically, my urban fantasies are about 80. And I just know, well, with romance especially, there's certain beats that you have to hit.
Sure.
There are certain rules you have to follow if you want the readers to
Be
read
sort
your
of
book
satisfied,
and
yeah,
like it.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, my books always have a happily ever after, which we call an HEA, and yeah, I follow certain beats. I don't necessarily, know ahead of time or have like an idea ahead of time, like, oh, I have to have this scene or I have to have that scene until I start outlining and plotting it out. And I may switch just a few things around as I'm going, but I definitely know, you have to have like the meet cute, the initial attraction, the conflict, the resolution, throw them together, make them fall in love, and then separate them and make them miserable, and and then find a way to get them back together.
Yeah.
So those are definitely things
Your classic
I want to hit.
rom-com type scenario shape.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, so when you, so as you say, you don't pants, which I'm not really surprised about given the kind of word counts you're talking about, because I think I would struggle to write. As I kind of do pants a lot of the time. I'm kind of somewhere in between the two. But I can imagine it being a lot quicker to get the words down if you've kind of got a very clear idea of where you're going and you're sure that it works ahead of time as well.
Yeah, if you have an extensive outline, it's just really easy. I always call it like my map, and you can always pants certain scenes and kind of go off on a tangent if you feel the need to. But for me, like, I know that I always have that guideline to go back if I get stuck or if I get lost. And I really enjoy having, in-depth character sheets that I put out, locations. I'm very visual, so I have Pinterest where I create storyboards for me to look at if I need inspiration. I have musical playlists geared towards certain characters and certain storylines, and it's quite involved. I have to get like my head into the zone. And so for me, when I do sit down to actually write the first draft, I feel very prepared and the words flow really easily. I mean, not to say I don't have days where I get stuck, of course, but that's usually has nothing to do with the story, but just my outside distractions. So, and then I did try with, after I run this last book I just published, I tried a different method where I learned from Steph Green, who has a podcast and a Facebook group called Rage Against the Manuscript. And she has this technique called skeleton drafting. And that is where you, after you outline, or you don't even need to outline, actually, you can just write a quick draft, like 20,000 words, without stopping, just whether it's dialogue, don't worry about descriptions and exposition and all that. You just kind of get the story down.
And then that happened, and then this happened, sort of thing. Yeah,
exactly. Like it's kind of like this. It's kind of like an extended outline, but she calls it a skeleton draft, and I'm not explaining it as well as she teaches it. But I tried that method, and that worked really well for me. I was able to write the first draft after that skeleton draft much quicker than I normally do.
That's a good tip. Yeah, I'm trying something very similar to that at the moment. I'm trying to just get the story out first. I mean, I'm essentially rewriting something, and I'm trying to get away from the story that I had before because I'm not happy with it. So I'm kind of trying to let it go where it goes. But I think I'm sort of holding myself back because I'm constantly thinking, am I going in the right direction?
Right,
so I think it'd be better to just kind of get it down. I think that's a good idea. I think that's a good tip.
Yeah, if you just get it down, then you can really see like what needs to change, I think. That's the biggest thing, that famous quote, you can't edit a blank page. You just have to get it on paper, and then you can take an objective look at it and see like, okay, this isn't working or this is. And then I, also never delete anything like permanently. I always have like a deleted file just in case, there's a scene that maybe didn't work for this book that I can use for a different book.
Absolutely. So that process that you outline, whether you do a skeleton outline or whatever, or whether you do it in your normal thing, you collect all these things together and you've got your Pinterest and all the rest of it. How long would you say on average that part of the process lasts for you? Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it months? Or does it just really depend on the project?
Yeah, it really depends on the project. I don't want to spend too much time, on research and plotting, because you end up getting sort of sucked into it, because it's a fun process, but it also helps you procrastinate writing sometimes.
I agree. Yeah.
So yeah, like you're like, oh, I need to research. That's why I can't write today. And that just becomes kind of a crutch thing, I think, eventually. But I try to give 2 weeks to really, and it depends. Like with the last 2 books I published, I had it extended outline in a day. I literally just woke up that morning, plotted it all out with some music, like scene by scene. Yeah, I got really lucky on those too. But then, I have an urban fantasy novel that I'll be writing for City L, that I'm going to start on in a few months, and that's going to be 80 to 90,000 words. That book's probably going to take me 6 to 8 months to complete, to my editor. And that outline is going to probably take me at least 2 weeks. It's also like the third book in a trilogy. So I'm wrapping up all these,
got to make sure it all fits together like a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah,
exactly.
So can you kind of give us a bit of an idea of what your route to being published, your kind of path to publication, if you like, the first time? So how did that come about? How did that happen?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I've been in, hospitality my whole life. And at the time I was a general manager of a spa at a major hotel, and it was, very corporate, and I just wasn't happy. I was making good money, but I was just working all the time. I mean, conference calls and payroll on my vacations. You just never have a day off. And I'd wanted to write ever since I was a kid. I grew up reading and writing poetry and short stories, but just never really took the time to kind of formulate a novel. And I just had no idea also, like, even how to write a novel. So I want to say I was like 35. I just turned 35. And I just got this idea for this story. This character came to my head, Gray, and she was this, 400-year-old vampire looking for revenge on the people that made her. And I spent almost 5 years plotting this book, just gathering information. And I have like 12 characters in that book, and really just fleshing it out, and also stalling because I didn't know what I was doing, And so then I started taking classes. I would follow writing blogs, and there'd be like a free workshop, and I started buying craft books and really, really learning like the art of storytelling, but like the novel structure as well. And then I joined some groups on Twitter, which was really great. There were 2 like weekly chats, with like a writer's hashtag. That was really inspiring and taught me a lot. So I eventually decided, okay, like, let me outline this book now that I've learned how to outline. And it took me about 2 weeks to outline Blood and Magic. And then it took me about 3 months to write the first draft. And then I wrote like 4 and 5 and 6 more drafts after that. And and I had a really hard time with the first chapter. That was like my biggest challenge, because you read all these things that, your first chapter has to be the best. You can get obsessed
about it,
yeah, especially when you're querying. So my first thought was like, okay, I need to query agents. That was kind of like I had big stars in my eyes. And so I got a list of agents, started querying. Of course, the rejections started coming in, and they were all very polite. Most of them were form letters. Just like, oh, this is not right for us kind of a thing. So nothing too demoralizing.
Sure.
And I have a pretty thick skin, and I knew it was going to happen. So then I just started looking around, and I discovered Small Press, and was just put out some questions to people about it, and decided, okay, well, maybe this isn't in a commercial type book. I have nobody knows who I am. It's kind of like this, new beginning. So I thought, well, maybe let me start smaller and not try to like go for Penguin Random, like right off the bat.
Straight off, yeah.
Yeah. So I queried a couple small press publishers and finally got a couple requests back, for full manuscripts. And so that was really exciting, but you still don't think it's going to happen. And then it was Christmas night that City Owl Press sent me an email offering me my contract for not only Blood and Magic, but they were interested in me writing it as a series. So they offered me a 3-book deal.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it was a really good Christmas. So yeah, it's been incredible journey ever since. And I have 2 series with them now.
So how did you feel when that came through, that email or whatever?
Oh my goodness. I got the, how you get the email notification on your phone, kind of like the preview text.
You don't know whether you want to open it or not.
Yeah, so we're sitting there by the fire. We had just, eaten Christmas dinner, and I'm there with my boyfriend and my mom and my sister. We're just chatting in the living room, and I happen to check my phone for some reason, and I see the preview of the email, and I just start going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And they, of course, thought somebody had died or something was horrible was going on. And I said, hold on a second. And so I opened up the email and, saw the big congratulations, and my mom started crying, and we were all kind of like, oh my God. We're kind of in shock just because, when it's your first novel that you've ever written.
Yeah.
People tell you all the time, oh, don't expect to sell your first book.
Well, I would say most people that I've spoken to, dozens and dozens of authors for this podcast, and I would say, well over 95% of them probably that's the case. Often the first novel is not the one that... I mean, a lot of the time it's not always necessarily that they even query the novel, to tell you the truth. A lot of people write the novel and they kind of know, well, this probably isn't good enough. It's my first try. And they might not be happy with it, or they don't. A lot of people don't edit it. They'll write the first one and they're so fed up with it they don't even edit it very much, and they just kind of put it in a drawer, and then they have another go, another one, and that's what I hear quite a lot. But I do hear as well, lots of people will not sell it the first time. They do try to query it and they send it out and it doesn't go, and then their second or their third or even in some cases their 4th book that they've written is the one that goes, and then sometimes they get to sell some of those other ones that they wrote before, but sometimes they don't, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of that as well. And so when I was going into it, I was trying to keep an open mind and not get discouraged, because I thought this would be the odds of me getting this book sold, are probably slim. And in fact, when the book was out for querying, I actually just started writing another book.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah. Did you?
Yeah. And which is a book that I still have not, finished or published. It's sort of like one of my passion projects, that I keep kind of, I don't know, I'm putting it off for some reason. Yeah. I think it's a completely different genre as well. I'm even might have to use a pen name with it just because it's so completely, completely different from what I write. But yeah, I'd started writing that book because a good friend of mine who is a published author at the time, I'd befriended him on Twitter, met him via Pitch Wars. And he was like, you just want to start writing the next novel. He's like, don't worry about the one you've queried because you've just got to keep writing, and so that was really good advice. And so I just started doing that. And then, of course, when I got the contract, I had to focus on that, on that series and get that written. So, yeah, one day I'll get to that other one.
And when they said, oh, we think this is series, did you think when you wrote the first one that it would be a series, or was that something they saw in it?
I knew it would be a series. I knew it would be a trilogy. But another piece of advice I got was do not write that second book until the first book gets sold, because otherwise, you could just be wasting your time. Yeah. If you never sell the first one.
Flogging a dead horse, as they would say here.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Yeah. So but I knew in my head, with this series, I had known, as soon as I started writing book 1, I knew how the entire series was going to end. I knew the titles for each book. And I also got very fortunate that City Owl let me pick my title, like didn't change my titles, because that does happen in publishing. They, if they think there's a better title
Sure.
for your novel, they'll do that. But then they let me have a lot of input in the covers. And, it was essentially, it was my baby, because, you get really attached, I think, the most to your first novel.
Yeah.
And it was a really great experience for my first time as well. So, yeah, I definitely knew it was going to be a series. I was hoping, that they would want all three. And so the way it worked was they wanted to rapid release them. And they didn't, they also probably wanted to make sure that I could actually write another novel and that I wasn't,
Sure, yeah.
A one-hit wonder there.
Yeah.
So they said, why don't you write all three books, and then we'll publish them once they're all written.
Right.
And so that's what happened. And then now, because I've established myself with them, I can write a book at a time. They know that I'm going to write the next one.
And presumably you can sort of pitch to them now, can you, rather than necessarily having to write the thing and then send it? You can sort of say, this is the idea that I've got for the next series or whatever. Yeah,
once they're part of that family, for the most part, it's more of just a pitch email of like, what do you think? I'm thinking about, writing this. And then with my contract as well, like if I write anything that's still in that world, whether it's, like my second series was a spinoff. So they have like first dibs at anything that's in that world anyways. So yeah, it's just a kind of a quick email, like, this is what I'm thinking of writing. Are you interested? And, and then they usually say, yes, we're definitely interested. So yeah, it's definitely nice to know that like, once you have that relationship, it's not as nerve-wracking to go through that querying process.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think drives you to write? You said in your one of your early answers, you kind of wanted to write from an early age. What do you think it is that drives you to write?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. Well, aside from just the simple fact of like, I enjoy, getting lost in writing on whether it's on a notebook or in the screen. I love storytelling, and I have such a huge imagination, very vivid imagination. And I love creating characters and worlds and just making them sort of come to life. And I visualize them in my head, like almost like they're a movie, happening. And books have been so important to me growing up. And I've, learned so much about myself through reading, and it's a great escape. It's a great way to travel if you can't travel. And I've always wanted to be able to write books that make other people feel that way, where they can like escape into a fantasy world to get out of their reality if they're wanting to check out for a while.
No, that's great. So as you've kind of travelled along in your journey, what would you say has been the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice that you've been given or that you've heard? And it might be something that you've adopted. It might be something that you haven't tried yet.
Yeah, I would say, gosh, there's a lot of great advice out there. One of the best things is, write the story that you want to write, and I think there's variations of that where, if there's a story out there that you want to read, but you can't find it, then write it, that kind of, mentality. I guess also just treat it like a business. I mean, as far as like, if you're wanting to have, it's one thing if you want to just write as a hobby, then just do your own thing, because outside of the boxes you want. But if you want it as a business, you definitely have to treat it like one, get up at a certain time every day, like have a routine, just like you would clock in for a shift, at work. And I think that's really important to also know your craft really well. I am obsessed with craft books and workshops, and I love filling my head with new things. And you're never going to learn everything. You're going to constantly be growing. And I don't care how many books you have out. You'll definitely still need to keep learning and practicing and, listening to other people's perspectives. So I think that's really important, is to just really learn your craft, read a lot, read often if you can, and don't give up, because everybody's path to success or publishing is totally different. I mean, just amongst my author friends, each one has a completely different story of how they got started and how they got published. And some people get lucky and option film rights on their debut novel because they're with Simon & Schuster, and other people, like Dan Brown, didn't get any success until he had 6 novels out. So, it really just try not to compare yourself to others' journeys because yours is going to be totally different.
That's great advice. So if you were starting again tomorrow as a new writer, what, if anything, would you do differently, or what would you go back and tell your younger self, do you think?
Don't take reviews personally.
Is that possible?
That's a big deal. Yeah, it is. Actually, it really is. Yeah, I remember the first reviews I got for Blood and Magic, I literally was like bawling my eyes out. They were terrible. And I, at the time I was so vulnerable, I was sharing a part of me with the world, and I didn't understand that, as much of it as a business at that point. And I took it really, really personally. And then over time, you develop a thick skin. You realize that the reviews aren't for you; they're for the reader, and that everything's subjective. Art is subjective. So, one person will hate your book, and then 5 people will say it's the best book they've ever read. So, really just not be hard on yourself. That's the biggest thing. That's probably the only thing I would, tell my younger author self is just don't pay attention to all of that. Just write what you want to write, and you'll find people that will love it. You'll find your readers.
That's good advice. So as we kind of wrap things up, what's up? Can you give us a sense of kind of what's up next, and also tell people where they can find out more about you, and tell them about your podcast as well?
Okay, awesome. Yeah, there's a lot going on. So I'm working on book 4 in Immortal Billionaires. It's called After I Burn. There is a pre-order up for it on Amazon if everyone wants to check that out. It is another couple. I don't want to give too much away on it because there's a little bit of a interesting twist in it. So, but it is following sequentially in the series. So that's coming up. It releases on October 5th, if I'm correct. And then there will be a book 5, After I Obey, which I haven't started outlining yet. I mean, I know loosely the plot, and that'll hopefully, if time allows and I stick to my deadlines, which I normally do, you never know, but hopefully I'm trying to get that 5th book out by the end of the year, but before Christmas, or at least before New Year's. And then, next year I will be working on Starlight and Dust, which is the 3rd book in my Beautiful Dark Beast series with City Owl Press. And I'm hoping to have that released by the end of 2022. And I'm just plotting some other series for my indie publishing, a spin-off series of Immortal Billionaires. And I have a lot of just different projects in the works.
Sounds like it.
I'm just too many ideas. That's my problem. So that's all happening. And then, yes, I co-host Spoiler Country podcast. And we are a primarily comic book culture, but also pop culture. And we interview really amazing creators from, every aspect of comics, whether it be traditional or indie. We've talked to a lot of people from Marvel and, Image and DC, but as well as people that are just starting out and have Kickstarters. And then we also talk to a lot of celebrities as well, like Hollywood people, like actors and musicians and stunt people and voiceover actors. So it's really fun. The show has been on the air, I believe, for 3 years. I joined them last year, and it's just a really great group of people. We have a lot of fun. Our podcast is pretty unique in the way we conduct ourselves. They're more conversational than just, like the robotic, kind of like what we're doing here, just like having a great
chat,
conversation. Yeah. So, definitely check that out. It's at scpod.net. And you can find me on every social media platform there is. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and I just recently opened a TikTok account, but I'm still trying to figure that one out.
I haven't been there. I keep talking about that, but I haven't brought myself to it yet. I struggle enough with Facebook, so Twitter is my chosen platform. It's where I do the most stuff. But
okay,
it's just
Twitter's easier for me too. I don't know why. It's more straightforward, I think.
Yeah, I think it's because it's usually a little bit of text, maybe a picture, and then haven't really got to give too much of yourself away like you have on Facebook.
Exactly.
I don't know. But
it's this TikTok is. I know there's a lot of authors, especially indie authors, that are utilizing TikTok as a platform and a way to sell books, and some are doing really well with it. I think there's just a whole, it's just another algorithm you have to learn. And I don't know, it's a little complicated for me, and I'm not really good with like some of the functions on it, like how they come up with these really cool videos with all the captions. And I'm like, what am I doing here?
Yeah. And it's the amount of time that you
So,
spend on it. But I'm sure you
yeah.
like everything else that you've been doing. I'm sure that you'll master it at some stage. So I don't doubt that you'll have a big imprint on there at some stage.
Right. Yeah.
I'm
No,
sure
I think, it's like anything. Like when I first started Twitter 5 years ago, I was like, oh my God, what is this?
Yeah.
It's just like anything where eventually it becomes like second nature.
It's the fear of
in
the
the
new,
end.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like in I'm Gen X.
Yeah.
So like
Me too.
I didn't grow up with technology. Yeah. It's just a harder thing for us.
Exactly. Yeah. We have to keep working out on it. Basically, we don't just get it naturally. It's not hardwired into us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I'm probably I'm most active on Instagram, and it's at Melissa Sercia Writes, and that's Sercia. And yeah, so I try to post daily on there, and then I have a Facebook group called Immortal Billionaires, so you can look that up if you want to join the group. And I also have an author page on there, and then Twitter, I'm at Fluid Ghost. And I'm primarily on Twitter. I'm posting a lot of like stuff for the podcast. So if you want to learn more about our interviews, definitely look up my Twitter.
Great. Well, I'll put those links in the show notes. But other than that, Melissa, it's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you. Thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Thank you so much. This has been an absolute blast. You had amazing questions, good conversation. I loved it.
Joined up writing.
There you go. Thanks again to Melissa, and I'll put all of her links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk, or you can find them in the podcast description on whatever device you're listening to this on. That's pretty much it for this week, but don't forget to get in touch with all your thoughts on the show, your feedback, and to tell me what's going on in your writing world, and you can do that by dropping me an email at wayne@waynekellywrites.com. Also, don't forget that you can get the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you want to listen to the podcast, and that way you can get the podcast downloaded automatically every time an episode comes out. Also, remember to leave us a nice rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. You can leave me a comment on YouTube or wherever as well. That'd be great. But the biggest thing that you can do, as ever, I know I repeat myself, but just tell somebody else. Tell at least one of your friends about it. Tell somebody else in your critique group or whatever. That would be fantastic, because that's the best way to grow the show. But other than that, thank you very much. Thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.